you got to focus on what the kids' needs are so that you can help them work through, I'm going to use this word again, trauma that they've gone through a separation and a divorce.
Welcome to the Dad Central Show, the podcast that helps overwhelmed dads conquer stress, build confidence, and become the father their family brags about. Join Drew Solon, a leadership coach and father of 5, and Ed Gow Jr., a fatherhood advocate and contributor to the Good Men Project, as we guide you through the journey of fatherhood. We'll show you how to connect deeply with your family, manage your time and energy better, and master tools to become the dad you want to be. Let's get started. Dating after divorce can feel like walking a tightrope, especially when kids are involved. How do you protect their stability while also pursuing relationships? So on today's episode of the Dad Central Show, we're going to be talking about divorce and dating again, boundaries, introductions, and stability for kids. So we're going to be talking about 3 main areas: setting boundaries, when to introduce kids, and maintaining stability. So Drew, what is going on in your world? You're clean shaven and beautiful sunshine behind you. For those who are watching this, what's going on?
Thanks, Ed. I don't know what else is going on other than we just celebrate Thanksgiving when we're recording this. So it was a great weekend. Enjoyed family time, enjoyed some good food, and enjoyed a little bit of a pause, a little bit of a break, which is nice. I don't know why, but my kids are already starting to talk about Christmas and
Well,
wanting to like
it's all over the
decorate.
media, man. It's all over the media. Come on, you know that. You know our capitalist-driven society.
I guess you could say that. Listen, I'm all for enjoying the holidays,
Mm-hmm.
but this want to decorate and start talking about, and my daughter was already playing Christmas music. Again, not
Oh
a
my
bad
God,
thing, right?
OMG.
But just
Already?
in terms of the focus, and yeah, you're right. It's in the stores. You walk out there, you see them
Oh
putting out the
my
Christmas
goodness.
stuff.
Yeah,
Anyways, I just find it interesting. It's like, you know, it's always upon you, I guess, thinking
yeah,
about what's next.
yeah, yeah. It used to be the next best thing. Now it's just the next thing, right?
Yeah, I guess so. You could say that.
Absolutely. So for those who don't know, this is Dad Central, a parenting podcast to reduce stress and build confidence in fatherhood. And our show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care. Dove Men Plus Care believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there's a positive impact. So before we get into today, your thoughts on this subject we're chatting about today: divorce and dating again, boundaries, introductions, and stability for kids.
Oh, my thoughts. I think it's obviously, well, we wouldn't be talking about it if we didn't think it was important. Everyone's experience and exposure is a little bit different. I think this can be a really sticky, challenging area. I think the kids can have, surprising reactions. They can have explosive reactions. They can, it could linger on for years and years and years. So I think it's an area that, you know, if there was a rule book or a like a guide, it'd probably be helpful. I think the reality is a lot of family breakdown happens, and obviously, we're humans. We want to reconnect and we want to have new relationships. But sometimes figuring that out after a broken relationship can be even more complicated, especially when children are involved. So I just think there's a lot here, and we'll do our best in the short time we have to give dad something practical, that hopefully that they can apply if they find themselves in this situation. Oh, and a resource that they can come look into afterwards as well. How about your thoughts, Ed?
Yeah, we could spend a week on this to give this justice in the short period of time that we're going to spend on it today. We're going to do our best, as Drew said, and I know Drew. I can speak with Drew also on this. We are assisting more and more dads that are in this situation, and it's something that, again, just like in general, when it comes to fatherhood, it's not talked about enough. This subject is not talked about enough. So it's important, definitely for me, and I know for Drew, I think I can speak for Drew on this, that this is addressed. Unfortunately, the number of divorces in North America, where we live in Canada, which is part of North America, is very high. And a lot of times kids are involved, and we don't believe of dads being alone. So we're just going to provide some highlights on some steps on how that next best step can be taken.
Yeah.
Anything with that, Drew?
Yeah. What's that? Uh, you mentioned a comment that don't believe dads should be alone. Sometimes being alone is appropriate in terms of you're being a single parent, you're recovering, you're healing, you're preparing yourself for the right next person that you'd be in a relationship. So I want to be mindful nobody um, mis mishears your comment and thinks, "Oh, that means I should always have a partner." I don't think that's what you're trying to say at all. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I would say if you choose to make that next step. And I think
Right.
part and
Yeah.
I think part of the process is, just from my lens, taking some time alone. We'll get to our next segment, but one of the questions I ask dads these days is, what do you value in your relationship with yourself?
Yeah. And I think what you were probably representing is that don't feel dad should be without support,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Maybe that's a friendly amendment I can make to your comment. That's really what I think. Alone in the challenge of being actively involved father as well as taking care of themselves. They shouldn't be without support.
100%. Absolutely. All right, let's go to our first segment. Let's have you share about setting boundaries for yourself and your kids.
Yeah, well, boundaries, as have learned through my separation divorce, I'd learned about it before, but in a new way in terms of how important they are because they're about protecting what matters and protecting what's important to you. And so when we put it in the context of, dating after divorce, well, boundaries are important to protect both you, your new relationship, as well as your children, right? And so that is really important that you have clarity on that before or in the early stages of a new relationship. Because if those boundaries aren't there and you kind of things move too quickly or not appropriately based on everyone's readiness and preparation and their emotional makeup, there's a lot of potential damage that can come and after effects of that. And so the goal here is to, I'd say, tread carefully and tread wisely. In particular, children who have gone through separation and divorce, it's basically like their world has been rocked. A bomb has blown up in their life, and there's often, depending on their age when it's happened, years and years and years of effects. Some of it is seen early on and through the divorce. Some of it isn't seen, and it doesn't start to come out until hopefully it does come out eventually, but it may not come out for years and years and years and later. And so that's why I think for me, recognizing how a new relationship may possibly impact your children is was one of those important areas to keep them mentally, emotionally safe. So those are some thoughts. Ed,
Yeah, I think, and then adding, because a reoccurring theme through our conversations with all of you, because we this is a co-creative effort for fathers and those supporting fathers, dads, and male caregivers, is how important having boundaries protects your emotional health and also your kids' health, emotional health, and also provides a sense of safety. When those boundaries are up and they're defined, especially for your children, it provides an environment of safety. And Drew and I believe, and I'm sure most of you believe, we want our kids to be safe as much as possible at all times, especially during situations like this, but also having that strong boundary environment is very important. Uh, I will add a three C's to this segment: clarity, consistency, and communication. So making sure the boundaries are clearly set, they're consistent, and they're always communicated about if there's a misunderstanding, or even if they are assumed to understand, just making sure that we're all on the same plane and all running the race together. Drew, before we move to our next segment, anything you want to add to that?
yeah, let's ground this in some like practical examples. So let's say you're a dad, you're in a new relationship. That person may be in your home. They may be seeing photos of your children. They may be talking to you about one boundary is I don't think you should ever want your children to be blindsided by the fact that you are in a new relationship. But you should also have some boundaries around when and how you communicate that with your children, as well as how and when your partner, which we're going to get to next, is introduced. But there's also some elements in terms of, sometimes dads are just like, hey, this is my relationship. I can do what I want with it. You may have your partner in your house. They may stay overnight. Who knows? The kids may be around. And so if there's no communication with your children about who this person is or what's going on, they're being blindsided and they're left to try and figure out and wonder what's happening here when they really never should be. So, these are some of the areas, as well as, if they're staying over, how long they're going to be staying over. Are they going to kids' sporting events? Are they going to the kids' schools? Are they picking kids up? Are they being alone with your children? These are all some of the areas that you need to think about in boundaries. And again, we're not telling you what to do or how to do. What we're saying is that this is an important consideration, and the boundaries need to be established to protect both your well-being, your children's well-being, and protecting that new relationship and the health of that new relationship. Okay, that's my clarification piece, and hopefully with some practical examples.
All right, I lost my positioning for a second there, but I am back. So next up, Drew, you set it up nicely, segue wise, talking about our next segment, introducing kids to a new partner.
Yeah, so I think it's important to consider things before introducing a new partner. So you should be considering. I think first and foremost your own health and well-being, and we're assuming you've worked on yourself and you're now ready back in a healthy relationship. So I'm going to caveat this by saying I'm going to make that assumption. If you haven't done that, and you're just jumping into a new relationship and you're really have a lot of work to do on yourself, I'm going to encourage you to do that first before you get into that relationship. But we'll make the assumption you have. So at this point, it's like, how long have you been in a relationship with this person? How stable, healthy, and respectful is the relationship? What is the potential long-term, considerations for this person? Because it's not just you that's impacted. If your children are going to be meeting this person, they're going to be forming some form of a relationship. And of course, knowing that they've already had instability, they've lost some things as a result of a separation/divorce. If you do that too soon and then all of a sudden that relationship ends, then they're experiencing that same, and I'm going to use this word, maybe a small t trauma, because they've now lost another person in their life that maybe they started to develop a relationship with. The other thing is, your children may not be ready to see you in a relationship with another person yet. And so that's why it's very important that I think you protect and guard, their preparation, their readiness. That may be very raw for them. The fact that you and their mother are no longer in a relationship, because it's natural that children want that what they've always known. So I think there are a lot of considerations there in terms of before you even go down the path of should this person my meet this person I'm in a relationship with. What do you had?
Yeah, I would think also just to add on to the valuable stuff you're sharing with us today, some mistakes to avoid, like not making that introduction too soon, not making it too frequent, and the lack of reassurance. So again, I would say navigating and knowing the environment of your kids, and there's no hard and fast way to know when it's the absolute best time, but taking those things in account. Is it too soon? Is there a lack of reassurance? Sitting, and I don't know, Drew, you may want to add to this, but just sitting with your kids and maybe preparing them for this. Because I know sometimes as I've worked with fathers and they haven't prepared the children for the introduction, and it's just hasn't gone the best.
Yeah, important point. But that's part of the initial communication, right? So, and I would say the communication should be exploratory, again, depending on the age. But most kids, even pretty young, I'd say, 3, 4, 5 years old, you can engage them in a conversation where you ask them exploratory questions in terms of, well, how do you feel about, mommy and daddy not being together again? Not to open up wounds, but to at least get a sense of where they at. I mean, it was for me, like a real life example here. I was, in a new relationship, like 13 and a half, 14 months after the initial separation. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that, your kids, my kids were probably still, even 6 months after that point, you know, grieving, not having what they always knew. There would be comments that would come up that would let me know, hey, they still wish mom and dad were together in their hearts. They knew in their head that that wasn't going to happen, but in their heart, they weren't there yet. So, there's some delicate things that you intersect. And so I always default in terms of the signs that the kids are ready. I mean, look, I think I was very fortunate that my kids quickly connected when the time came to introduce them to Kristen. They quickly connected with her, and you know, in ways that we were shocked in terms of how much they gravitated towards her. So I consider that a huge blessing. I know many dads who don't experience that, and whose kids really reject the new partner. And so I think maybe the reason that happened is because we were as mindful and as careful as we were. There was communication with the children long before an introduction happened. There was communication actually between or some sort of touch points like a gift here or there, a card here or there from the person that was in relationship, so they actually got to get a sense of this person before actually meeting them. So I know I'm going on a bit here because we could take a lot more time, and I think we're gone way beyond where we should. But the point is that finding ways that are going to work well for your children, inviting them into the conversation, exploring, not pushing too hard, not expecting too much from them, and always defaulting to where they're at first, I think is your most important role as a dad.
Excellent. Let's look at our final segment, stability and reassurance for kids.
Yeah, as I've mentioned two other times, their world has basically been rocked. And the sense of safety and security comes from the adults that are in their life. And that's been torn apart. So they need a safe, stable place to believe that the world's not going to blow up again. And if you are thinking that that relationship is potentially unstable or going to introduce them to, less than ideal interactions between you and your new partner, those are important things you need to protect for your children as well as for your long-term health, because ultimately, I think your relationship with your children is really crucial, and you don't want to potentially put a barrier in between you and them as you go through this. And don't get me wrong, some dads in their head, I can hear them still saying, but Drew, my needs are important too. 100%. I'm not denying they're not. But sometimes the wisest choice is to choose to wait and to choose to support your children so that when the right time comes, you make the road that much easier for both yourself and for your children in the right relationship that is going to serve all of your needs and help create a more stable and healthy overall family dynamic, as opposed to you just kind of getting your immediate needs met. And so I think that's, again, my default is you got to focus on what the kids needs are so that you can help them work through the, I'm going to use this word again, trauma that they've gone through a separation and a divorce.
Nice.
And you have some
I'll,
wisdom. I'm sure you can throw in
just
there too.
I just add some quick things here, like devising practical strategies to mean routine, consistency, and connection. So you have your relationship and some things you do with your children that are very positive. That should not be altered because of this phase. You want to keep things consistent. You want to keep the connection consistent. You want to keep those things in place consistently, because if they see and feel something's different, they're going to feel it. They're going, and also listening to your kids' feelings without guilt or defensiveness. A new person, have them be honest with their feelings and don't use guilt or defensiveness when they're communicating about that. And Balancing that new relationship, with consistent parenting presence. Again, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace, but don't compromise your parenting. My thought, don't compromise your parenting presence because you're going into this next zone. So let's do a quick review of what we chatted about
Yeah,
today.
I think let me ground that.
Go ahead.
Can I ground that with an example of, another person I know who's still in the, not finally divorced, but has been separated for a while, and their protection of he protects his children in terms of his partner. They're lives completely separately. They still have separate vehicles. They don't spend the night over at each other's places, and especially around when the kids are potentially there. So they keep these clear boundaries. They protect the children. They know obviously that they're in a relationship and have met each other, but they don't push beyond the things that are most relevant for their kids. And this now does create some tension in the relationship, but the reality is they navigate it together as best they can, again, to support because they both have children from a previous relationship and they know they've got to protect and guard it even more.
Well said. So, just a recap of what we covered today. We first talked about setting boundaries for yourself and your kids. And in that point, let's remember boundaries help protect both you and your kids. Next up, we talked about introducing kids to a new partner. Introduction should be intentional, not rushed. And then finally, stability and reassurance for kids. Kids thrive on stability. Keep routines and reassurance front and center. And, I'll just add something before Drew provides a resource that dating after divorce doesn't have to be confusing or damaging. It can be healthy for you and safe for your kids. What resource do we have for today for our family?
The resource we have is a book called One Step at a Time. It's a guide for dads who are in, blended or divorced, in blended families, or find themselves in a step parent role. Or I think there's value in that resource, both from a guidance perspective, but also understanding, okay, how do I navigate this as well in case my partner might have other children, my new partner might have other children that I need to develop a relationship, which we didn't really talk about today, but it's another area as well.
Excellent. Well, as always, want to thank you for taking the most important thing that you have in your life, your time with us today. And as always, we want to say, don't just manage your time, manage your energy. Remember to give yourself grace, and we'll chat with you soon. Be well and keep the faith.